It is not a request. It is a debt that is paid tonight." The words of her father fell like stones in the silence of the studio. Valentina was standing next to the window, observing the lights of the city without really seeing them, her hands intertwined with such force that the knuckles had turned white. On the other side of Caoba's desk, Damian Cortez remained motionless, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made the air feel denser, more difficult to breathe. He had not said anything yet. He did not need to. His simple presence filled the space with an invisible weight, a silent authority that did not require words to be understood. Damian was older than her, probably 15 years older, perhaps more. His dark suit was cut to perfection, each line designed to emphasize the power that already emanated from his posture. He had the face of a man who had made impossible decisions and had never looked back, with a strong jaw and eyes that seemed to be able to read every hidden thought. Valentina had heard of him for years. Everyone knew Damian Cortez. He was the kind of man who wrote articles in business magazines, the kind of man whose name opened doors that remained closed to the rest of the world. He built empires, bought companies as if they were low-value shares, moved money with a gesture of the hand, did not get married, did not need anyone. And yet, there he was, watching her as if he were evaluating an investment. Her father cleared his throat, uncomfortable under the silent gaze of the other man. The debt he was talking about was not just money. It was years of bad decisions, of businesses that failed, of loans taken with dangerous men who did not forgive delays. It was the reputation of a family that once had a respectable name, and that now hung from a thread so thin that it could be broken with a simple blow. And she was the solution. They had not consulted her. They had not asked Valentina for an opinion. They simply informed her 3 days ago that her life was about to change forever, that she would get married, that there was no alternative, that it was her duty, her responsibility, the only way to save what was left of her family. At first, she thought it was a cruel joke. Then, when she saw the despair in her father's eyes, the way he avoided her gaze, she understood that it was absolutely real. She cried that night, alone in her room, with her face sunk in the pillow so that no one could hear her. But the tears did not change anything. They never did. Now she was here, in this studio that smelled of leather and expensive whiskey, waiting for Damian Cortez to decide if she was worth it. He finally spoke, and his voice was serious, controlled, without a hint of emotion. "Do you understand the terms?" He was not asking her father. He was asking her. Valentina turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze for the first time since she entered the room. His eyes were dark, almost black under the dim light, and there was something in them that made her shudder. It was not cruelty, exactly. It was indifference, as if she were just another transaction in an endless list of business to close. "Yes," she answered, and her voice came out firmer than she expected. "I understand them." It was not true. She did not understand anything. How could she understand to become the wife of a man she did not know, to live in a house that was not hers, to share a bed with someone who saw her as part of an agreement? But to say that she did not understand would not change anything. So she lied, because lying was easier than facing the truth. Damian nodded slightly, as if her answer was enough. He stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt with precise movements, almost mechanical. He was tall, much taller than Valentina had thought. When he approached her, she had to tilt her head back to maintain visual contact. "I do not expect love," he said, and each word was deliberated, carefully chosen. "I do not expect devotion. I expect discretion, respect, and that you fulfill public appearances when necessary. Nothing more, nothing more." As if being married to him was as simple as signing a labor contract, as if she could disconnect her emotions, her hopes, everything she ever imagined for her life, and simply exist as an elegant shadow by his side. She squeezed her lips, struggling against the impulse to scream, to ask him if he had ever felt something real, if he had ever wanted something that he could not buy. But she remained silent, because she knew that none of that mattered. He was not interested in her thoughts. He was not interested in her as a person. He was only interested in closing the deal. Her father then approached, placing a hand on her shoulder with a pressure that he intended to be comforting. But that only felt heavy. She did not look at him. She could not. If she looked at him, if she saw guilt in his eyes, she could forgive him. And she was not ready for that. She was not sure if she would ever be. "The marriage will take place in 3 days," the man continued, again addressing her father, as if she were no longer in the room. "It will be a private ceremony, only witnesses. Then she will move to my residence. Her belongings will be moved tomorrow. 3 days, 72 hours to say goodbye to the life she knew, to the few friends she had, to the illusion that one day she could choose her own path. 72 hours before becoming the wife of a stranger." That night, back in her room, she sat in front of the mirror and observed herself for a long time. She tried to see how he would see her. Young, probably too young for him. Pretty, she assumed, although she had never felt particularly beautiful. Vulnerable. That was the word that continued to appear in her mind. Vulnerable and completely out of control. She wondered what kind of man would accept this kind of arrangement. What kind of man had so much power, so much wealth, and yet chose a wife in this way, as if he were buying a property. She wondered if he had lovers, if he would continue to see them after getting married, if she would be just an ornament in his perfectly structured life. And then she wondered something worse. She wondered what would happen on the first night, if he would wait for her to fulfill duties that she did not even want to imagine. If she would have to pretend that she did not care, that she could disconnect from her own body and simply survive. Fear pierced her then, cold and acute. It was not necessarily fear of him. It was fear of losing herself, to become someone she did not recognize, to wake up one day and realize that she no longer knew who she was. The 3 days passed like a blur. There were papers to sign, lawyers who spoke in legal terms that she barely understood, a wedding dress that they brought her without asking her if she wanted to choose it herself. It was elegant, expensive, perfectly appropriate. It was also completely impersonal, like everything else. The ceremony was as he promised. Small, silent, without flowers, without music, without warmth, only words pronounced by an employee who seemed eager to finish. 2 witnesses who signed without looking her in the eyes, and a ring that Damian slipped on her finger with the same neutral expression that he always kept. When the employee declared that Valentina Mendoza and Damian Cortez were married, he did not kiss her. He only looked as if he had completed a task on his list and offered her his arm to leave the building. The car that awaited them outside was black, luxurious, with windows so dark that it was impossible to see inside. He opened the door for her, an empty gesture of courtesy that only reinforced the strangeness of everything. They sat in silence while the driver took them to what would now be their home. She observed through the window how the city was gradually transforming. The buildings became more spacious, the streets wider, until they finally reached an area where the residences were hidden behind high walls and security gates. The car stopped in front of one of those gates, which opened automatically to reveal a private road bordered by perfectly cared-for trees. The mansion that appeared at the end of the road was impressive. It was not ostentatious. It was not designed to impress. It was elegant in a way that only real money could buy, with clean lines, large windows, and an architecture that seemed to merge with the landscape that surrounded it. "This will be your home now," he said, while the driver opened her door. "No," she thought, "this is your home. I only live here." But she said nothing. She just got out of the car and followed him inside, where an employee was waiting for him to show her rooms. Rooms, plural. Not the room they would share. separate rooms. It was then that she completely understood. He did not want a wife. He wanted a silent presence that fulfilled a specific role when necessary, and that disappeared when not necessary. He wanted total control, without the annoyance of real intimacy. And she, for the first time since all this began, felt relieved. If he did not want anything from her, then she would not have to give anything. She could exist in this space, in this life that she did not choose, without having to really surrender. At least, that was what she thought. That night, after the employee left her alone in a room larger than the entire apartment where she had grown up, she sat on the edge of the bed and waited. She was not sure what she was waiting for. Maybe he would come, knock on the door, to tell her what he was expecting from her now that they were married. But the hours passed, and the door never opened. The silence of the mansion was absolute, broken only by the occasional sound of the wind against the windows. Eventually, she changed her clothes, got into bed, and turned off the lights. She did not sleep. She simply lay in the dark, looking at the ceiling, wondering how she had gotten to this point, wondering if he was awake too in some other part of this huge house, thinking about her, or if he had already forgotten her, now that the agreement was complete. She had no way of knowing that, at that very moment, he was sitting in his studio, with a glass of whiskey in front of him, untouched, unable to concentrate on the work that normally consumed him. He had no way of knowing that his mind was still returning to the way she had raised her chin when he asked her if she understood the terms, the way her hands trembled slightly when she signed the papers, the moment their eyes met, and he saw something in them that he did not expect. No fear, no resentment, only a silent resignation that, in some way, disturbed him more than anything else. And for the first time in years, he wondered if he had made a mistake. Valentina did not know when the silence of the mansion ceased to be comforting and became something oppressive. She had spent hours alone in that huge room, exploring every corner, as if by understanding the space she could also understand her new life. The dressing room was larger than her old room. The bathroom had a marble bathtub large enough for 2 people. The windows gave to a garden illuminated by subtle lights that created dancing shadows among the trees. Everything was perfect. Everything was cold. She had changed clothes more than an hour ago, choosing a simple ivory-colored silk shirt that she carefully found folded in one of the drawers. Someone had prepared everything for her arrival. New underwear, even with labels, different fabrics, boots, soft shoes. It was as if they had studied her exact measurements without having to ask her anything. The idea made her feel exposed in a way that she could not fully explain. Now she was sitting on the edge of the bed, with her hands on her lap, waiting. She did not know exactly what she was waiting for. Damian had been clear in his father's study. He did not expect anything from her except discretion and appearance. But that clarity had not included instructions about this night specifically, this first night as a couple. The clock on the nightstand marked almost 11. Outside, the city continued its nocturnal life, regardless of the fact that her world had just changed completely. Valentina wondered if she should just lie down and sleep, pretend that this night was no different from any other. But every time she tried to lie down, her body became tense, unable to relax. A soft knock on the door made her start. It was not an insistent knock. It was almost hesitant, as if the person on the other side was not sure whether he should be there. "Go ahead," she said, and her voice was just a whisper. The door opened, and Damian entered. He had changed his suit for more casual clothes, although casual for him meant perfectly ironed dark pants and a white linen shirt with the first buttons unbuttoned. He looked different like this. Less intimidating, perhaps, or maybe it was just that the dim light of the room softened his features in a way that the study lighting had not done. He was carrying 2 glass glasses in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "I thought we could talk," he said, and something in his tone surprised her. It was not the controlled and neutral voice of before. There was a note of uncertainty in him, so subtle that she could almost have imagined it. Valentina hesitated, unable to find words. She observed him while he placed the glasses on the table and served the wine with measured movements. He offered her a glass, and she took it, her fingers touching briefly in the transfer. It was an insignificant contact, but it made her aware that it was the first time they touched since he slipped the ring on her finger. Damien held the other glass, but did not drink immediately. Instead, he stood next to the window, looking towards the illuminated garden, as if the answers he was looking for were hidden among the shadows of the trees. "I know this is not what you expected from your life," he finally began. "I know you did not choose this." Valentina took a small sip of wine, more to have something to do with her hands than to drink. The liquid was soft, expensive, probably from some exclusive winery that she would never have known in other circumstances. "You did not choose this either," she replied softly. "You could have had any kind of agreement, any woman." He turned his head to look at her then, and in his dark eyes there was something she had not seen before. It was not exactly vulnerability, but something closer to honesty than anything he had shown so far. "I do not want any woman," he said. "I do not want games, expectations, emotional complications that come with conventional relationships. This is simpler, or at least it is supposed to be." "It is supposed to be," Valentina repeated, capturing the nuance of doubt in his words. Damian finally drank from his glass, a long drink as if he needed the courage that alcohol could give him. Then he approached the bed, but did not sit down. He just stayed there, close enough for Valentina to have to tilt her head up to look at him. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted, and the words seemed to cost him a physical effort. "I do not know how to have someone in my space without feeling like an invasion. I do not know how to share a life without losing control of mine." The confession took her by surprise. This man, who seemed to have absolute control of everything, who moved fortunes with a gesture, who had built an empire from nothing, according to the articles that Valentina had read about him. This man was admitting that he did not know how to handle something as basic as the presence of another person. "I do not know how to do this either," Valentina answered honestly. "I do not know how to live in a house that is not mine. I do not know how to be the wife of someone I do not know. I do not know how to wake up every day knowing that my life no longer belongs to me." Their gazes met and held. At that moment, something changed. It was not dramatic. There was no background music or passionate statements. It was just a mutual recognition that both were lost. Both were trying to navigate a situation that neither of them had chosen. Damian finally sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance between them. He placed his glass on the table and joined his hands, looking at them as if he could find answers in the lines of his palms. "My father taught me that power is everything," he said in a low voice. "That showing weakness is inviting someone to destroy you. That trusting someone is giving them a weapon that they will eventually use against you. I built everything following those rules, and it worked. I have more than I ever imagined possible." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was even softer. "But I am also completely alone." Valentina felt something move in her chest, maybe compassion or recognition, because she also knew what it was like to be alone, even surrounded by people. Her family had been there physically, but emotionally, there had always been a distance that she never knew how to cross. She extended her hand slowly, hesitating before placing it on his. The contact was tentative, light, as if she were afraid he might reject her. But Damian did not move away. Instead, he turned his hand so that their palms touched, intertwining his fingers with hers in a way that felt surprisingly natural. "You don't have to be alone," she whispered. "I know this is not conventional. I know it is not what any of us imagined. But we are here, and maybe we can find a way for this to work." He looked at her then. He really looked at her, as if he were seeing her for the first time. Not as part of an agreement, not as a solution to a problem, but as a real person with her own fears, her own hopes, her own loneliness. "You are afraid," he observed, but it was not an accusation. It was simply a fact. "I am terrified," Valentina admitted, "but I suppose that makes me human." A small smile touched Damian's lips. It was barely noticeable, but it was there, the first smile she had seen in him, and it completely transformed his face. For a moment, he did not seem the powerful businessman who controlled empires. He seemed just a tired man who had forgotten how to connect with another human being. They remained like this for what seemed an eternity, sitting on the edge of the bed with intertwined hands, the wine forgotten in the glasses. The silence between them no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a shared space, a temporary refuge from the outside world that demanded so much from both. Eventually, Damian spoke again, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "I can stay. Don't stop, just so I won't be alone tonight." Valentina sighed, unable to trust her voice. He lay down on the bed, completely dressed over the sheets. She did the same, keeping a prudent space between them, but close enough to feel his warmth. The lights remained on. None of them suggested turning them off, as if darkness could break the fragile connection they had just established. "Tell me something," Damian said after a moment. "Something no one else knows." Valentina thought for a moment, looking among the memories of her life for a truth she had never shared. "When I was a child," she began, "I used to imagine that I was adopted," she confessed. "That my real family would come to look for me one day and take me to a place where I really belonged. It's silly, I know, but even now, sometimes, I still think about it." "It's not silly," he said. "I used to imagine that my father would disappear and that I could finally breathe without feeling that every decision I made was being judged." They looked at each other in the dark of the room, two strangers who shared secrets that they had never told anyone else. And at that moment, Valentina understood something fundamental. Damian had not chosen her because of her appearance or because of any specific quality he saw in her. He had chosen her because he was sure, because he had no expectations, because he thought he could keep her at a distance without hurting anyone. But now, lying side by side in that huge bed, they both discovered that the distance was more difficult to keep than they had anticipated. The hours passed, and they talked about small, insignificant things, their favorite foods, books they had read, places where they had wanted to travel but never did. Nothing deep, nothing that required too much vulnerability. Only the type of conversation that two people could have if they were meeting each other in normal circumstances. At some point, Valentina felt her eyelids heavy. The emotional exhaustion of the day finally reached her, and she began to fall asleep without realizing it. The last thing she registered before falling completely was the feeling of Damian's hand looking for her hand again, holding it with a kindness that contrasted deeply with the hardness that he projected to the world. Damian remained awake long after she fell asleep. He observed her in the dim light, studying the way her face relaxed in sleep, the way her breathing became deep and constant. There was something deeply peaceful in her, something he had not experienced in years, perhaps never. For the first time since he could remember, he was not thinking about business, about strategies, about the next move he had to make. He was only there, present, aware of the warmth of another person by his side. And he was terrified of how much he liked that feeling, because Damian Cortés did not need anyone. He had built himself under that premise. Need was weakness. Dependence was dangerous. But while he lay there, listening to Valentina's soft breath, he felt something he had not felt in decades: peace. And that peace scared him more than any business threat he had ever faced. But before continuing with this story, allow me to take a break for a moment. Beautiful. I would love to know where you are listening to this right now. Are you at home, perhaps lying in your bed, at work, during a break, traveling somewhere. Wherever it is, I want you to know that your company means a lot. If this story is touching you in some way, if it is making you feel something, I would be very happy if you left a like and shared in the comments where you hear us. I read each of the comments personally, and I always reply. This community that we are building together is special, and you are part of it. Now, let's go back to Valentina and Damian, because what comes after this night will change everything between them. Valentina woke up with the light of the sun filtering through the transparent curtains. For a moment of confusion, she did not recognize where she was. The ceiling was too high, the sheets too soft, the silence too absolute. Then the memory returned suddenly. The mansion, the marriage. She turned around quickly, looking for him, but the other side of the bed was empty. The sheets where he had slept still retained the slight trace of his body, but they were already cold. He had left a while ago, probably hours. Valentina did not know why that absence hurt her in a way she did not expect. She slowly got up, wrapping the silk robe around her body while walking towards the window. The garden looked different under the light of day, more green, more alive, almost unreal in its perfection. Gardeners worked in silence in the distance, pruning bushes with surgical precision. Everything in this place seemed designed to be perfect, impeccable, without space for chaos or spontaneity. A soft knock at the door took her out of her thoughts. An older woman entered with a professional smile, but genuine. She introduced herself as Elena, the housekeeper, and explained that breakfast was served in the dining room. When Valentina asked about Damian, Elena replied with an expression that revealed nothing. Mr. Cortez had already left for the office. He usually does not return until nightfall. Of course, Valentina should not have been surprised. This was exactly what he had said he was expecting. Discretion, appearances, nothing more. The night before had been an anomaly, a moment of mutual weakness that he was probably already regretting. The following days set a pattern. Damian got up before dawn and disappeared into his business world. Valentina wandered around the huge mansion like an elegant ghost, exploring rooms that no one else used, sitting in living rooms designed to impress, but never inhabited. They dined together a few nights, courteous conversations about nothing important. He asked if she needed anything. She said no. Both pretended that the distance was what they wanted, but something had changed after that first night. Although neither of them recognized it out loud, Valentina began to notice little things. The way Damian tensed when she entered a room, as if her presence alone altered the air he breathed. The way his eyes looked for her during dinner, even when he pretended to be focused on the documents that he invariably brought to the table. The fact that he always served, never just one, as if he anticipated that she would join him. One night, almost 2 weeks after the wedding, Valentina came down late in search of water. The house was dark except for the light that leaked from Damian's studio. The door was half open, and she stopped, unsure if she should interrupt. She observed him through the narrow space. He was sitting in front of his desk, but he was not working. He was just looking at the screen of his computer with an expression that she had never seen. Tiredness, loneliness, a kind of emptiness that no amount of success could fill. Without really thinking, she gently pushed the door. "You can't sleep," she said. It wasn't a question. Damian looked up, and for a moment something crossed his face. Relief, gratitude. It disappeared so quickly that she could have imagined it. "Work does not wait," he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Valentina entered the studio, closing the door behind her. She approached the small bar in the corner and served 2 glasses of whiskey without asking if he wanted one. She put one in front of him and sat down on the leather chair near the desk. "You have been working every night until late," she observed. "Is it always like this, or are you avoiding me?" The honesty of the question seemed to surprise him. He took the glass, turning it between his fingers, but without drinking. "I'm not avoiding you," he finally said. I'm avoiding the way I feel when you're close." Valentina's heart beat faster. She waited, knowing that if she pressed, he would close completely. The silence spread among them, heavy with unspoken things. The first night, Damian continued, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "I slept better than I have slept in years. And every night since then I have been awake, wondering why, wondering what your presence has that makes the silence feel different." Valentina felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't love yet, but it was the beginning of something that could become that if they weren't careful. "Maybe," she said softly, "it's because neither of us is really alone for the first time in a long time." He looked at her then, and in his dark eyes there was a vulnerability that completely disarmed her. Damian Cortés, the man who built empires and bent wills with a simple look, seemed lost, as if he had spent so much time being strong that he had forgotten how to allow himself to be anything else. "I'm afraid," he admitted, and the words seemed ripped from the depths of his being. "I'm afraid of needing you. I'm afraid that if I start to depend on your presence, on your voice, on the way you make this house feel less empty, I won't know how to work if you ever leave." "I'm not going to leave," Valentina said, although she wasn't sure if it was a promise she could keep. "We both know that I'm here for an agreement, but that doesn't mean that we can't make it work in some real way." Damian stood up then, walking around the desk until he was in front of her. He knelt slowly, meeting her eyes, and took her hands between his own. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to the image of absolute power he projected, that Valentina held her breath. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice broken. "I don't know how to let someone in without feeling that I'm losing control of everything I've built." "Then don't lose control," she whispered. "Just share it. Let me be here, not as an agreement, not as an obligation, just as someone who understands what it is to feel alone, even when you're surrounded by everything." Their faces were so close that she could feel his breath. Valentina saw the exact moment when something in him broke, or maybe opened. Damian leaned his forehead against hers, closing his eyes, as if he were trying to memorize this moment, this feeling of connection that he had denied for so long. They remained like this, breathing the same air, sharing the same space, without the need for more words. They didn't kiss. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was something deeper, more intimate in a way that didn't require physical contact. It was the recognition that both of them had been building walls for so long that they didn't even remember how it felt to be close to someone defenseless. Eventually, Damian stood up, gently pulling her to get up as well. Without saying anything, he led her out of the studio, climbing the stairs to the second floor. But this time, instead of going to the separate rooms, he stopped in front of the door of his own room. "Stay with me," he said. And it wasn't an order, it was a plea. Valentina agreed, and he opened the door, revealing a space that was so different from the rest of the house that it almost seemed to belong to another person. Where the rest of the mansion was perfect and cold, this room had personal touches. Books stacked on the nightstand, a worn blanket folded over an armchair, framed photographs that showed a younger version of Damian before the weight of the world settled on his shoulders. It was the only place in the whole house where he allowed himself to be human. They lay down together in bed, this time without the pretension that it was just for tonight, without the excuse of novelty. Damian surrounded her with his arm, pulling her to his chest, and Valentina could hear the constant heartbeat of his heart. It was comforting in a way she didn't expect, as if that constant rhythm was a promise that, despite everything, they were both alive, present, trying. "Tell me about your family," Damian murmured in the darkness. "Your true family, not the edited version." Valentina thought about how to respond. She could lie, present a softer image of her upbringing, but he had given her his truth, and she owed him the same honesty. "My father was a proud man," she began, too proud to admit when things went wrong, too proud to ask for help until it was too late. He loved me in his own way, I suppose, but his love was always conditioned so that I fulfilled the expectations, good grades, appropriate behavior, never causing problems. And when he gave me to you to pay off his debts, I think in his mind, he was doing the best for everyone. He never thought about asking what I wanted. Damian's arms stretched around her, drawing her closer. "I'm sorry," he simply said. "I'm sorry that none of us had the option to choose. But we are choosing now," Valentina replied. "Every day we stay, every conversation we have, every time we decide to try to make this work, we are choosing." She felt more than she saw his smile in the darkness. "When did you become so wise?" "I'm not wise," she replied. "I'm just tired of pretending that this is something that isn't. We don't love each other. We still don't. Maybe we'll never do it. But there's something here, something real, and it would be silly to ignore it just because it doesn't fit how things are supposed to be." That night, Damian slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Valentina remained awake a little longer, listening to his breath becoming deep and constant, feeling the way he unconsciously drew her closer, even in his sleep. And she understood something that scared her and moved her to the same extent. This powerful man, this business titan that the world saw as invincible, needed her. Not the way he needed employees or business partners. He needed her in a fundamental, visceral way, as if her mere presence filled a void that he had been ignoring for so long that he didn't even remember how it felt to be complete. And the scariest thing of all was that she was starting to need him too. Not in the desperate way that you need the air, but in the calm way that you need a home. A place where you can stop pretending, where you can simply be, where your imperfections are not only tolerated, but understood. The following days confirmed what that night had revealed. Damian began to look for excuses to be close to her. Lunches suddenly canceled to eat at home. Telephone calls during the day just to hear her voice. Returning home earlier, with weak explanations about meetings that ended before expected. Valentina did not confront him about the change. She only accepted his presence, aware that if she pointed out what was happening, he could get scared and go back. Instead, he was simply there, reading in the room while he worked on his laptop, preparing coffee in the exact way she liked, asking about her day with genuine interest. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mansion began to feel less like a luxurious prison and more like a home. But there was something that Valentina could not ignore, the intensity with which Damian looked at her sometimes, as if he were trying to memorize every detail. The way his jaw tensed when she casually mentioned things she enjoyed, as if he were taking mental notes. The way his breathing changed when she was close. It was not only comfort that he was finding in her presence, it was something deeper, more dangerous. It was dependence. And although Valentina understood the desire to be needed, to care for someone in a way that transcended the transactional, she also knew that this type of dependence could become suffocating if they were not careful. One night, while they were having dinner in the main dining room for the first time in days, Damian left his fork and looked at her with an intensity that made the air between them feel loaded. "Have you ever thought of leaving?" he asked abruptly. "To simply disappear one morning and never look back?" The question took her unawares. Valentina carefully placed her own glass of wine on the table, taking a moment to consider her answer. "Every day during the first week," she admitted honestly. "But now I'm not sure where I would go." Damian slowly nodded, as if her answer confirmed something he had been thinking. "If you ever want to leave," he said in a low voice, "I will not stop you. But I need you to know that I would destroy myself." The confession was suspended between them, raw and vulnerable. And Valentina knew, at that moment, that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. They were no longer two strangers fulfilling a contract. They were two deeply lonely people who had found in each other something that neither knew they needed. And that, Valentina understood, was both a blessing and a curse. The transformation was so gradual that Valentina did not see it coming until it was too late. At first, Damian's attention was flattering, the way he remembered small details of her conversations, how he appeared at home with books that she had casually mentioned that she wanted to read, the way his face was subtly illuminated when she entered a room. It was sweet, she thought. It was a sign that he was opening, that the connection between them was deepening. But slowly, imperceptibly, something changed. Damian began to call her several times a day when he was in the office. At first they were brief calls, only to hear her voice, he said. Then they became more frequent, longer. If she did not answer immediately, she could hear the tension in his voice when he finally returned the call. He was not angry, exactly. It was something more worrying. It was fear. One afternoon, Valentina casually mentioned that she had gone for a walk in the neighborhood. Damian's reaction was instantaneous and disconcerting. His face tightened. His hands clasped on the desk where he worked. "Alone?" he asked, and his voice had a tone that she had never heard before. "Yes, alone," Valentina replied, confused by his reaction. "I just went to the coffee shop on the corner. I needed some fresh air." He did not say anything else at that moment, but the next day a driver appeared. Javier introduced himself as her personal driver, assigned to take her wherever she wanted to go. For her safety, Damian explained when she protested. It was an exclusive area, but it could still be dangerous. Valentina wanted to believe him. She wanted to think it was just genuine concern. But something about the way Damian avoided her gaze when he gave the explanation made her doubt. The following days confirmed her suspicions. Damian began to ask increasingly specific questions about how she spent her days, who she spoke to, what she did while he was away. The questions were wrapped in a casual tone, but Valentina could feel the weight behind them. The need to know, to control, to make sure that she was exactly where he expected her to be. She began to feel suffocated. The mansion, which had begun to feel like a home, began to feel like a cage again. A beautiful, elegant cage, with all the comforts that one might desire, but a cage at the end of the day. The breaking point came 3 weeks after Damian confessed that losing her would destroy him. Valentina had made plans to have lunch with an old friend, one of the few people who had kept in touch with her after the marriage. It was something simple, innocent, just a couple of hours in a nearby restaurant. She mentioned the plans to Damian during breakfast, hoping that he would feel them and continue reading the newspaper as he used to. Instead, he dropped the cup of coffee. The dark liquid spilled over the white tablecloth, spreading like a stain of ink. But Damian did not notice it. He only looked at her with an intensity that made something in Valentina's chest tighten uncomfortably. "Cancel it," he said, and it was not a suggestion. Valentina blinked, sure she had misheard. "Sorry?" "Cancel lunch. It's not a good time." "Why not?" she asked, feeling that something cold was settling in her stomach. Damian stood up, moving away from the table. When he spoke, his voice was tense, controlled in such a way that only someone on the verge of losing control can sound. "Because I don't want you to go." The brutal honesty of the statement left her speechless. There were no excuses, no elaborated justifications, only the naked and disturbing truth. He didn't want her to go, and in his mind, that should be enough reason. Valentina also stood up, feeling that anger began to replace confusion. "You can't be serious. I'm completely serious," he said, turning to face her. His face was a mask of tension. "Why do you need to see her? What does she have that you can't have here?" "She's my friend, Damian, one of the few people who still bother to contact me. I can't just ignore her because you're afraid that she'll leave this house." "I'm not afraid," he said. But his voice broke slightly in the last word, betraying the lie. "Yes, you are," Valentina replied. and for the first time there was something similar to pity in her voice. "You're afraid that if I leave, I won't come back. You're afraid of being alone again. But that doesn't give you the right to turn me into your prisoner." "You're not my prisoner," Damian protested, but the words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. "No?" Valentina laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "So tell me, when was the last time I did something without you knowing exactly where I was and with whom? When was the last time I had a conversation that you didn't have to go through later? You're so scared of losing me that you're doing everything possible to make sure that I can never escape." The silence that followed was absolute. Damian looked at her, as if she had put into words something that he had been fiercely denying, even to himself. His face was a mixture of pain, shame, and such profound despair that for a moment Valentina wanted to go back. She wanted to say that she hadn't said it seriously, but she didn't, because it was the truth, and they both knew it. "I can't live like this," she continued. Softly now, but firmly. "I can't be the solution to your loneliness if that means completely renouncing myself. I can't breathe alone when you give me permission." "So what do you want me to do?" Damian demanded, and there was despair in his voice. "Do you want me to simply pretend that I don't care? That I don't care if you're here or not?" "Because I can't do that, Valentina. I've crossed that line. I need you in a way that I never wanted to need anyone." "I know," she replied, feeling that tears began to burn in her eyes. "And that's exactly why I need space. Because if we continue like this, I will completely disappear in your need. And then there will be nothing left of me for you to love." "I don't love you," Damian said automatically, a defensive response born of panic. Words fell between them like broken glass. Valentina felt each one cut her off, even knowing that it was a lie, knowing that he was lying to her and to himself. "No, fine," she finally said, her voice strangely calm. "Then I shouldn't mind if I leave for a few hours." She went to the door, but Damian caught her, gently grabbing her wrist. Not forcefully, never forcefully, but the contact stopped her dry. "Please," he whispered, and his voice was broken in a way that she had never heard before. "Please don't go." Valentina closed her eyes, feeling that tears were finally pouring down her cheeks. Because that was the trap, right? He would never use force. He would never force her physically. He would only use this, his pain, his need, his inability to function without her. And somehow that was worse. "I have to do it," she replied, gently releasing her wrist. "Because if I don't do it, if I let this continue, we will end up destroying each other." It came out before he could respond, before his own resolution could fail. Javier was waiting for her outside, as always, and she gave him the address of the restaurant with a trembling voice. Lunch with her friend was a mess. Valentina could barely focus on the conversation, her mind constantly returning to the expression on Damian's face when he asked her to stay. The naked despair, the fear, the need that consumed him. When she returned to the mansion 3 hours later, she found it in absolute silence. There was no background music. There was no television or radio sound. Only a dense, heavy silence that seemed to vibrate with tension. She found Damian in his studio, sitting in the dark, although it was midday. He had not raised the blinds. He had not turned on the lights. He was just there, in his chair, looking into the void. "You came back," he said when she appeared at the door, and his voice was completely empty, devoid of emotion, of life, of everything. Valentina felt that her heart was breaking. This powerful man, this business titan that the world feared and respected, had completely collapsed in the few hours she was away. And the most terrifying thing was that she could see that it was not manipulation. It was real. He genuinely did not know how to work without her. Damian began, but she raised a hand to stop him. "No," he said. "You are right. Everything you said was true. I have become dependent on you in a way that is not healthy, in a way that is suffocating you. I know. I always knew it. I just did not want to admit it. He stood up slowly, as if each movement cost him a monumental effort. He walked towards the window, holding his back as he spoke. When I was a child, my father taught me that loving someone was giving them power over you, and that this power would always, inevitably, be used to hurt you. So I learned not to love, not to need, not to allow anyone to get close enough to care. He paused, his voice barely a whisper when he continued. And then you came. And for the first time in my life, I felt what it was to have peace. I felt what it was to wake up and not to feel that constant emptiness. And I was terrified, because I knew that if I allowed myself to feel that completely, if I allowed myself to really need you, I would be destroyed when you left. So I tried to control it. I tried to control you. I tried to make sure that you could never leave me building such a comfortable cage, so beautiful, that you would not want to escape. And in the process, I did exactly what I swore I would never do. I became my father. Valentina approached him, her own anger dissipating before the raw honesty of his confession. "You are not your father," she said softly. "No," he replied, turning to look at her, with eyes that shone with tears not shed. "I am worse, because he was at least honest about his cruelty. I have been lying to myself, telling myself that this was for your safety, that it was just a concern, when the truth is that I simply cannot stand the idea of losing you." The silence between them was dense, with everything they were not saying, with the love that no one dared to name, with the need that both felt, but that only one had allowed himself to consume. "I need you to give me space," Valentina finally said. "I am not leaving. I am not leaving you. But I need you to trust that I can leave this house and still choose to return." Damian nodded slowly, although each line of his body was tense with the effort to accept that. "I need help," he admitted, professionally, "because this is not love. It is obsession, and if I do not face it now, I will end up destroying the only real thing I have had in my life." That night, they slept in separate rooms for the first time since they began to share the space. Valentina lay awake in her bed, listening to the silence of the mansion, wondering if she had done the right thing, if asking for space was the first step towards healing or simply the beginning of the end. On the other side of the corridor, Damian did not sleep either. He just looked at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of her absence, struggling against the impulse to go to her, to beg her to return, because Valentina was right. If they continued like this, they would destroy each other. But that did not make her absence less painful. The following weeks were the most difficult that Valentina had experienced since she arrived at the mansion, not because Damian was cruel or vengeful, but because his emotional absence was more painful than any confrontation could have been. He kept his word. He began therapy, twice a week with a psychologist specialized in attachment disorders. He did not tell her the details of his sessions, and she did not ask. But she could see the changes, small at first, almost imperceptible. The way he stopped before calling her during the day, as if he were struggling against the impulse. The way he felt when she mentioned plans to go out, although she could see the tension in his jaw. But the space between them felt like an abyss that grew every day. They slept in separate rooms, ate at different times. When they crossed at home, the conversations were courteous, but superficial, like two strangers sharing a space, not like two people who had shared their darkest secrets in the dark. Valentina told herself that this was necessary, that Damian needed this space to heal, to learn to exist without depending on her for his mental peace. But the nights were long and lonely, and more than once she found herself in front of the door of his room, with her hand raised to touch, only to step back at the last moment. A month after their confrontation, Valentina received a call from her father. It was the first time they had spoken since the wedding. His voice sounded different, older, full of something that could have been regret. "I wanted to know how you were," he said, and the words sounded rehearsed, as if he had practiced this conversation many times before calling. "I'm fine," Valentina replied, although she wasn't sure if it was true. "I heard that you haven't been going out much, that your husband is very protective." The observation took her by surprise. How did her father know that? Had Damian and he been talking? The idea shook her stomach. "Things are changing," she said carefully. There was a long silence on the other side of the line. When her father spoke again, his voice was full of emotion. "I'm sorry I put you in this situation. I'm sorry I prioritized my pride, my inability to admit failure, over your happiness. I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know that if you ever need to get out of there, if you ever need help, I'll find a way, even if it costs me everything." Valentina felt the tears burn in her eyes. They weren't the words she needed to hear a month ago, or 3 months ago, or when he handed her over as payment for a debt. But they were the words she needed now, when she was finally learning to make her own decisions. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, "but I think I need to figure this out for myself." After hanging up, she sat in silence in her room, processing the conversation. For the first time, she understood something fundamental. She had been so focused on Damian's dependence, on his need to control her, that she hadn't recognized her own lack of agency. She had allowed her father to hand her over. She had accepted marriage without fighting, and when she finally found the strength to set limits with Damian, she had done it from a reaction point of view, not a conscious choice. She wasn't sure if she loved Damian, but she knew that if she stayed, if she chose to stay, it had to be because she genuinely wanted to be there, not because she had no other choice, not because she felt forced, but because she saw a future with him that was worth building. That night, for the first time in weeks, she went down to dinner at the main dining room. Damian was already there, reading something on his tablet while waiting. When she came in, he looked up, and something in his expression softened. "I didn't know you were coming," he simply said. "Me neither," Valentina admitted, taking a seat in front of him. They had dinner in silence initially, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of weeks ago. It was different, calmer, as if both were simply existing in the same space, without the pressure of having to fill it with words. Eventually, Damian left his fork and looked at her directly. "My therapist asked me a question last week. She asked me what I was really afraid of losing if you were leaving. And my first answer was everything, that I would lose everything. But she pushed me. She made me go deeper." He paused, putting his hands on the table. "The truth is that I was afraid of feeling that emptiness again, that feeling that no matter how much you achieve, how much you build, you are still fundamentally alone. But what I have learned is that you cannot fill that emptiness for me. No one can. It is something I have to face myself." Valentina slowly sat down, feeling that something in her chest was loosening. "And what have you discovered?" she asked softly. "That the loneliness I felt was not due to the lack of people around me. It was because I had never learned to be really present. I was always thinking about the next move, the next strategy, the next goal, even with you at the beginning. I was not really there. I was just clinging to the feeling of not being alone." He stood up, slowly surrounding the table until he was in front of her. He did not come too close, respecting the space she had asked for, but his eyes were full of raw honesty. "But now I am trying to learn to be present, to feel things completely instead of controlling them. And it is terrifying, Valentina. It is the most terrifying thing I have ever done, because it means accepting that I cannot guarantee anything, that you could leave tomorrow and I could not do anything to stop you." But he also continued, his voice softer. "It means that if you choose to stay, If you choose to be here with me, I know it is real. It is not because I have you trapped. It is not because you do not have other options. It is because you genuinely want to be here." Valentina also stood up, slightly closing the distance between them. For the first time in weeks, she extended her hand, and Damian took it with a kindness that contrasted with the despair of past weeks. "I have to confess something too," she said. "I have been so focused on setting limits, on making sure I do not lose myself in your need, that I have not allowed myself to admit what I really feel." "And what do you feel?" he asked. And there was vulnerability in his voice, but not despair. Valentina took a deep breath, finally allowing herself to feel the truth that she had been avoiding, that at some point in these last months, I fell in love with you. Not the powerful man the world sees, but the man who admits to being afraid. The man who is willing to do the hard work of healing, instead of simply demanding that I fix it. The man who let me go when I asked for space, even when I know it destroyed him doing it. Damian's eyes were filled with tears that he did not try to hide. "I do not deserve that," he whispered. "Probably not," Valentina replied with a small smile. "But love is not about deserving. It is about choosing. And I choose you, Damian. I choose to stay. I choose to build something real with you. But I need you to understand that that choice is only valid if I have the freedom not to choose you too." "Well, I understand," he said. And she could see that he really did, for now, at least. "I know this will be a continuous job, that there will be days when the panic returns, when he wants to control everything again. But I promise to keep doing the job, to keep choosing you the right way." This time, when they approached, it was different from all the previous times. There was no despair, there was no fear. Only two people who were finally meeting in a place of real honesty. When they kissed, it was soft, tentative, as if they were learning from each other for the first time. And in a way, they were, because this was the beginning of something new. Not a marriage built on a commercial agreement, but a relationship built on choice, on growth, on the type of love that can only exist when both people are brave enough to be vulnerable. The following months were not perfect. There were setbacks. There were times when Damian felt the impulse to control, to hold on too tight, and had to take a break, breathe, remember the tools he was learning in therapy. There were times when Valentina felt suffocated and had to communicate her needs clearly, without expecting him to read her mind. But there were also unexpected moments of beauty, mornings when they woke up intertwined and could simply be there, without haste, without need, conversations about dreams that they had never shared with anyone, genuine laughs about small, silly, completely ordinary things. Valentina began to take art classes, something she had always wanted to do, but never had the courage to try. Damian learned to cook, clumsy and imperfect, but enjoying the process of creating something with his hands that had nothing to do with business or power. Together, they began to design a life that belonged to both. Not the life he had built before she arrived, not the life she had imagined before meeting him, but something completely new, created together, with space to grow and change and evolve. One night, almost 6 months after their confrontation, they were sitting in the garden under the stars. Damian had his arm around Valentina, but without squeezing, without clinging, just holding her the way you hold something precious that you know could go away at any moment. "Do you know what my therapist told me today?" he asked, looking at the stars. "What?" "That true love is not about needing someone to survive. It is about choosing someone, even when you could be alone. It is about sharing your life because it makes it better, not because you can't work without them." Valentina smiled, turning to look at him. "Your therapist is wise." "She is," Damian admitted. "And I think I'm finally starting to understand what it means. I could live without you, Valentina. I could work, exist, but I don't want to. Not because I'm afraid of being alone, but because my life is genuinely better with you in it." "Mine too," she replied. And it was true. They kissed under the stars, and this time there was no shadow of despair or control, only love, the kind of love that had grown slowly, built on solid foundations of honesty, hard work, and conscious choice. It was not the end of her story. It was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more growth, more moments of having to choose each other, even when it was difficult. But finally, after months of fighting, of getting lost and finding yourself again, they had reached a place where both could breathe, where love was not a cage or a desperate dependence. It was simply a choice they made every day, the choice to build something beautiful together, not because they had to do it, but because they genuinely wanted to. And in that choice, finally, they both found the peace they had been looking for all their lives, not in possessing or being possessed, not in controlling or being controlled, but in the simple, profound act of being seen, being chosen, and choosing in return, over and over again, with all the freedom in the world to do it. That night, when they returned home, it was to the room they now shared, not because they had to do it, but because it was where they wanted to be, together. Finally free, finally at peace, finally in love in the right way.